Improvising with the triads often looks like how you probably move on the dance floor. I'm guessing it's quite clunky and unpredictable. There's probably no flow or grace to your movements. If your solos feel really awkward every time you try and change chords, well, you're in the right place, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to connect your triads more smoothly across the fretboard, so your solos don't feel like you're just guessing your way through the chord changes. Now, I might not be able to fix your dance moves, but I can show you 2 strategies I've developed by personally teaching tons of intermediate players. Plus, I can show you the most common mistake that keeps your triads from sounding musical. Most intermediates that start working with me can find triads fairly decently. The problem is they can't connect 2 of them together to make a musical sounding phrase, and this often sounds quite disjointed in their playing. Real quick, if you're interested in making progress like all the other intermediates I work with, you can check out my website. There's going to be a link to get started in the description. So here's what's going wrong with the triads. When you first learn triads, you're taught these shapes and you learn to enter them from the lowest note, always ascending to the highest note. So for example, if I have this like A major triad over here, and let's say that the next chord of my progression is this like E major, you probably learn that like, okay, you can play both of these triads like this. And then you might think, okay, I can arpeggiate them. And that's kind of like playing through the chord tones. And you think, okay, well, I can kind of do that when I'm improvising. So you go, all right, this is time to play A major now. And then you go, okay, now it's time to play E major. Right? What happens is we always start from this kind of lowest note of the shape and then go down. And this means that every time we switch between a new shape, there's a load of like calculation going on in our brain. We're always trying to find that one same spot from the lowest string, and it kind of breaks the flow of our phrasing. A lot of the time, even if you're hitting all the right notes, it's really difficult to get that kind of continuity and flow between these 2 triads. It's kind of like hitting a red light every time the chords change. We want to be able to cruise and always hit those green lights and never really have to think about stopping our playing. So let's fix that. Let's break out of the habit of always starting from that lowest note and learn how to create some more movement and flow between different triads in order to improvise through the chord changes more smoothly. So I want you to think of triads like staircases. They're meant to be climbed both up and down. If you can only go in one direction with these triads, you're going to get stuck. So to show you what I mean, we're going to look at an E minor to A major chord progression. That's a 2-5 in the key of D major, and it's also the chord progression to Breathe by Pink Floyd. That's the reason I chose it. I really like that song. So let's look at the triads that we have for E minor to A major. So I can play this E minor triad over here around the 12th fret, the 14th of the D, and 12 on the G and the B. And then I can play this A major triad like this over here on the 14th fret of the D, G, and B. It's quite nice, they're right next to each other, right? So what we're going to do to smooth out the transition and make things kind of flow and not like a lot nicer is we're going to start by going from the D, G, B on the E minor triad here. So we're kind of ascending in pitch. Now, most of us, just kind of out of habit, whenever we go to the A major triad, we would do the exact same thing. We would ascend in pitch over there from A major. But this can be a bit clunky sometimes, like going from this highest note all the way to starting a new phrase all over again. We want to be able to connect them so they're one continuous flowing phrase. So to do that, we're going to ascend in pitch for one triad, and then on the highest note over here for this triad, we're going to make our way to the highest note of the new triad and descend in pitch, and that kind of links them both together. So it's kind of this like circular motion of pitch and triads. So from E minor to A major, it's a lot smoother. And to figure out how to do this, you're really going to want to understand your triads and inversions, right? You can imagine this would be quite difficult if I played E minor over here and then I had to make my way to the A major root position all the way down here. So instead, you want to find your triad, keep inverting it until you find the one that's closest to where your original chord was. So again, now I can connect them together and flow between each of them a lot more smoothly. And again, this kind of same principle applies for any triad. I could do this with a different set of inversions. So let's say I was like E minor over here, and then A major over here. So and there we go, I've just connected 4 different triads together. That's like the E minor to A major here, and then E minor to A major here. And this creates a much more smoother flow between these triads, and it stops you from kind of like having to do the calculations every time a new shape comes around. Once you understand how to ascend and climb up one triad and then go the other direction for the next triad in your progression, it becomes a lot easier to kind of connect these different triads and find those chord tones a lot smoother when you're improvising. So eventually, when you start targeting triads like this and connecting 2 of them together rather than just playing them in isolation, you're probably at some point going to feel a bit overwhelmed just because you have so many notes going on. You feel like you have to use all the notes all the time. So we're going to try and simplify this a bit. And to do that, we're going to think at one string at a time. So let's go back over here to this E minor to A major. But now, instead of thinking of these like massive chunks on the fretboard, I want you to ask yourself one question when you're trying to improvise, right? And that question is, what's the smallest possible change I can make to get to the next chord? So let's figure out how to do that string by string. So from E minor over here to A major over here, let's look at the D string. What's the smallest possible change we can make between the 2 of these? Well, actually, this D string on the 14th fret is the same for both of those triads. So we have a note in common. So hypothetically, I can play E minor and only play that note on the D string, and then I can play A major and only play that note on the D string as well, and it's going to make sense over both of those chords. Now let's look at the G string, right? So for E minor, I have this going on the 12th fret, but for A major, it moves up to the 12th fret over here. So the smallest possible movement I can make between E minor and A major on the G string is right over here. So if I could only play one note for E, and then one note for A, that's the smallest possible change I can make on that G string. Now let's look at the B string as well, right? Again, my shape for E minor over here on the B string is on the 12th fret. However, for A major, it's on the 14th fret. So again, the smallest possible movement I can make on the B string is over here on the 12th fret for E, and then 14 for A. So by training your ear and your eye to see things this way, you're no longer making like really big, unnecessary jumps. You're figuring out how to create smoother, voice-led lines that sound more polished and professional. And this is exactly what pros do to sound connected when they improvise. They're not just hopping around scales and different shapes, they're weaving between them a lot more seamlessly. Sometimes you'll hear a guitarist play a solo, and all they have to do is change one note, and it sounds perfect. The reason they know how to change that one note is because they understand where the smallest possible movement is between those 2 different triads in their chord progression. So understanding your triads and how to change just one note to target the new triad is going to make you sound a lot more melodic and intentional when you're playing. So now the final step that we want is to place everything we've looked at with these triads inside of a scale shape. So we're going to pair everything we just looked at with the E minor pentatonic scale, because that scale fits the key signature of D major, and it also supports both of these triads that we just looked at. Now, in order to sound really melodic, don't let the scale notes distract you. They're a bit of a red herring. Here's how we do this. I want you to play your triad. So we have E minor over here. And again, go string by string and look at the scale tones above and below each point on that triad. So on this D over here, I have this note over here below and this note over here above for the E minor pentatonic. And then for G, the G string over here, I have this note below and this note above. And then for the B string, I have that note below and this note above. So if I want to sound melodic, I play the notes above and below this point of the triad, and I kind of finalize and center everything around the triad. So for like the D string over here, or the G string, or the B string, and I do that for the E minor triad. But again, now let's look at the A major triad. Again, the D string, the G string is going to be here now, and the B string is going to be here. So now I kind of play above and below each of those individual points, and it sounds a lot more like A major. So again, don't let the scale notes distract you too much. Again, the triad, the notes inside the triad shapes are the most important parts to sounding melodic. This teaches you how to keep everything centered around those triads, which are the chord tones, right? So think about these scale notes as accessories to the two triads. We still want to focus on ascending up one triad, descending through the next, and then zooming in string by string and looking at the places where we can make the smallest possible movement to get to that next chord. When you understand how to combine all of these concepts together, you'll no longer be randomly jumping between different triads. You'll be weaving a solo that actually sounds like music. If you're an intermediate guitarist and you're tired of just guessing your way through solos, and you're ready to start finally improvising with confidence across the entire fretboard, then I want to invite you to work with me inside my intermediate transformation program. This is where we cut through all the noise and follow a clear step-by-step system that helps you turn the scales that you already know into real music. So your solos don't sound like patterns, and they actually sound like a genuine musician played them. If you've hit a wall where YouTube videos just aren't getting you the breakthrough that you need anymore, this is the next step. So you can get started by heading to my website through the link in the description or the pinned comment.